Chapter 3, The Daily Life of the Monks, Part 4. Who were these men? Whence had they come, and why? As for their origin, they belonged, so far as we can now discover, to the same class from which the ministry is still mainly recruited, to the great company of those who are neither rich nor poor, who neither earn their living by their hands, nor inherit the means of living from their fathers, represented in medieval England by the gentry, as distinguished on the one side from the peasantry, and on the other side from the aristocracy. As for their motive, each had his own. "What are you here for, Bernard?" The great saint of the Cistercians had the question written on his wall, "Ad quid venisti, Bernarde?" To this inquiry, the abbey might have returned as many as 50 different answers. Some of the white-gowned men came in pure love of God, deeming a life of continual prayer the most blessed of all lives, delighting in it all, finding in the cloister the foursquare city of God which is pictured in the book of the Revelation. Some came from love of leisure, or of simple peace and quiet. The worse ones, disposed to be respectably idle, the better, finding the outer world too boisterous for their gentle souls. Some came because they were disappointed, some because they had failed, some because they had suddenly seen the emptiness of common life, the baseness of much of it, the flagrant evil of some of it, and had come out of it that they might live to a good purpose. Thus Ralph, the seventh abbot, had begun life as a soldier. He was a contemporary of Robin Hood, who in the ballad met a friar of fountains, and by him was soundly ducked in the middle of the little river. Richard of the Lionheart was at that time ruling England, after his fashion. Men were marching across Europe to the Holy Land. The profession of arms must have appealed strongly in those days to the heroic and even to the religious nature of many men. But Ralph did not like it. It displeased him much, and one day, coming to Fountains, where his father had already become a monk, he consulted a lay brother, whose name was Sunulf, homo simplex et illiteratus, but wise in the counsels of God. And presently the soldier and the brother each had a dream in the same day. The knight dreamed that he was in a church, and that the figure on the crucifix cried, saying, "Why do you not come? Why do you wait?" To which he replied with tears, "Behold, Lord, I come." The monk, sleeping in the long dormitory over the storehouse, saw the soldier dressed in a monastic habit. So Ralph became a monk, and presently an abbot. The possibility of that promotion brought some men into the monastery. In a world hopelessly divided into classes, the monastery was the residence of democracy. Here the humblest man, if he could but read and write, might rise as he deserved, to be the kitchener, the hospitaller, the sacrist, the cellarer. Some day, who could tell, the abbot, wearing a mitre, consorting on terms of equality with the noblest of the realm, ruling his fellow men. But here are the brethren, sitting in the chill cloister, reading their good books, and awaiting the day. At the first light the bell rang, and they went again into the church for the psalms of lauds. After that, they returned to the dormitory and washed their hands and faces in the room over the river. By this time the sun was fairly up, and the hour was come for the psalms of prime. The first psalm, according to the gracious arrangement of St. Benedict, they said very slowly, in order to give late-comers time to get in. Prime was followed by Mass, or by chapter meeting, the order differing with the season of the year. The monastic year was in 2 parts. Winter began on September 14th, being Holy Cross Day, a date still used in the prayer book for determining the autumnal ember days, summer began at Easter. Out of the church, from prime or mass, the brethren proceeded to the chapter house. This great hall opened through 3 noble arches from the east walk of the cloister. 2 of these arches were blocked, as it appears, by book closets, but not at the beginning. The books were probably stored at first, as in other Cistercian abbeys, in the room between the transept and the chapter house. Afterwards this room was put to other uses. At the further end and on the sides the brothers sat on triple tiers of stone benches. The meeting began with a reading from the monastic book of martyrs, how this brother and that, in the old time, had lain down his life for his master. Then there were prayers, and sometimes a sermon, to the hearing of which the lay brothers might be summoned. Then was read a chapter from the Rule of St. Benedict, a custom which gave its name both to the meeting and to the house in which it was held. Thus their high ideal was kept continually before them. Once a week a list was read of the household duties and of the brethren to whom they were assigned, for these homely tasks came to the monks in turn. One after another they cooked the dinner, or waited on the table, or swept the dormitory. Finally, cases of discipline were considered. In a life which, at best, was somewhat monotonous and narrow, the minor annoyances of human fellowship would easily be exaggerated. The rule of silence could not restrain the brothers from thinking, and some of the thoughts would naturally take the direction which is indicated in Browning's Soliloquy in a Spanish Cloister. The chapter meeting was, accordingly, a place for the summary adjustment of all the petty grievances. Brother Robert made his complaint against Brother William, and Brother William confessed or explained, and whoever was adjudged to be at fault was properly punished, sometimes by loss of precedence, sometimes by lack of dinner, in serious cases by flogging. Down got the brother on the cold floor, paved with the tombstones of past abbots, and there was soundly whipped for the good of his soul and for the edification of the brethren. When whipping was not sufficient, he was put in prison. Under the abbot's lodgings, beneath the ground, were 3 convenient dungeons, in whose walls and floor are to be seen to this day the staples for the chains. It is not likely that these dungeons were in frequent use. Many hard things were indeed said about the monks at the time of the suppression, but it must be remembered that they were said by interested persons in the heat of controversy. Even then it was agreed that in the, quote, great and solemn monasteries, end quote, such as Fountain's, religion was, quote, right well kept, end quote. The monks were slandered, that they might the more conveniently be robbed. Henry VIII desired, for various reasons, good and bad, to destroy the monasteries and take possession of their lands and treasures. He desired also, like all the Tudors, to keep the goodwill of the people. The royal commissioners sent to visit the religious houses and report upon them understood the situation and met it. They showed that the monasteries were so bad that a good nation ought to be happy to have its king suppress them. It is true that the enthusiasm for the monastic life was waning. The best men were turning their energies and finding their ideals in other directions. The strength and devotion of the people were being put into politics, into preaching, into the practical life of the parish. Moreover, there had gradually grown up a social as well as a religious separation between the monks and their neighbors. Fountain's Abbey, for example, was built, as we have seen, by the benefactions of rich and noble persons. It was on that side an aristocratic institution. It differed in this respect from the parish churches which were erected and maintained by the plain people, and especially by prosperous citizens of the mercantile order. Mr. Micklethwaite has put the situation clearly in his paper on the Cistercian order. Quote, "To a citizen or a franklin," he says, "a monk was a dignitary, but the parish priest was his neighbor and friend, and the parish church was his own." End quote. This fact, that the great substantial middle class were no longer deeply interested in the abbeys, not only accounts in some measure for the indifference with which they witnessed their destruction, but for the difficulty which the monasteries found at last in getting recruits among men of this good kind. The personal quality deteriorated. There were bad monks, no doubt, as there are still bad ministers, and the few bad ones attracted more attention than all the cloistered saints. And anyhow, the life which they were endeavoring to live was an abnormal life, apart from the wholesome influences of natural human society and from the helpful engagements of the common routine. The monasteries inevitably degenerated. But, quote, "an enemy," as Burke said, "is a bad witness, a robber is worse." End quote. The quiet judgment of the modern historian is in favor of the monks, and finds most of them to have been men of respectable and pious lives. The sober persons in white cassocks, who confessed faults in the chapter meeting and cheerfully suffered chastisement for them, to which the man in the street gave not a moment's thought, had a passionate longing to be good. They were intent upon the living of a righteous life.